And now we will hear from Paul Thompson, the famous author of the 911 timeline, which we all have used as a reference. Paul. If you, yeah, Paul's not on time. Is Mike Rupert ready? Okay, very good. Thank you, Paul.
Hi there. We were going to do a... What was that?
You got to get sworn in.
Y'all got to
sorry.
Make sure. Do you swear? Yeah, raise your right hand. The standard has been set now. Do you swear to tell us the truth here today?
Of course.
Thank you very much. We need the truth.
All right. Should I move this up?
Oh yeah, it's the one with the balls on it.
Well, I'll get started anyway. So I want to talk about two things today. So I'll just go straight into it since I don't have a lot of time. First thing I want to talk about is the foreign intelligence warnings about 9/11. Some of you may have seen out in back, I have this book that has just come out a couple days ago called The Terror Timeline. And this is based on my website. And the material I'm going to talk about today is based on what I've done on the website and now is in the book. And everything in there is from mainstream source material, CBS News, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, that kind of material. So I want to preface that everything I'm saying here, everything I'm going to be saying, is coming from those kinds of sources. And the first thing I want to start with is a quote from President Bush just a few months ago. He said, "Had I any inkling whatsoever that the people were going to fly airplanes in the buildings, we would have moved heaven and earth to save the country." So he didn't have any inkling whatsoever. And now I'm going to tell you something I think was probably the most significant thing that came out of the 9/11 Commission and it really got ignored. And just briefly mentioned in one of their staff statements, it said that in the beginning of the summer of 2001, Osama bin Laden actually started publicly talking about the 9/11 plot. He would go to mosques and he would speak in front of large crowds in Afghanistan, talking to his followers, talking to local people who are coming to the mosque. And according to the 9/11 Commission, he actually would say things in his speeches, like in one speech he said that people should pray for the success of an upcoming attack involving 20 martyrs. Or another person said that bin Laden told them that the U.S. would be hit by a terrorist attack and thousands would die. So there's this really kind of very almost open secret about the 9/11 attacks. So another example would be John Walker Lynn. You might have heard of him. He's kind of they call him the Marin County Taliban guy. He went over there, joined Al-Qaeda. In a matter of days, he learned all about the 9/11 attacks. He learned that there were going to be all these different airplanes involved. So in other words, it was just a very, very widely talked about thing in Afghanistan. So then what we see is that all these foreign governments picked up on this and started warning the U.S. It also says in the 9/11 Commission report that this knowledge, this foreknowledge, was so extensive that it spread throughout the radical fundamentalist network throughout the world. So people all over the world, including in the United States now, were getting details of the plot months in advance. And this is why, I think this is the main reason why we see now all these governments start warning the U.S. So I'm just going to run really quickly and just tell you some of the warnings that came out. And remember that all of these are mentioned in very mainstream sources, New York Times, Washington Post, this kind of stuff. And none of the things I'm going to talk about today, except for what I just said, but all these foreign intelligence warnings, none of these are talked about in the 9/11 Commission. They've just completely ignored all of them. It's like these reports never happened. So also all of these things I'm going to talk about all are from 3 months before 9/11, June, July, August. All these warnings start coming out. So the British, they warn the U.S., they say Al-Qaeda is in, quote, the final stages of a very serious attack on a Western country. And then they also warn that an Al-Qaeda attack will involve multiple hijackings. So it'll be a single attack, multiple airplanes hijacked. Then Egypt, they warn, and this to me is the most astonishing warning, also in the way it was just completely ignored. It was on 60 Minutes on CBS, just mentioned briefly. And I'll quote it for you. It says, in late July, Egyptian intelligence says it received a report from one of its operatives in Afghanistan that 20 Al-Qaeda members had slipped into the U.S. and 4 of them had received flight training on light aircraft. To the Egyptians, pilots of small planes didn't sound terribly alarming, but they passed on the message to the CIA, fully expecting Washington to request information. The request never came. So if that's not, we know there were 19 hijackers instead of 20. There were 4 training on light aircraft. And again, it's not surprising given what, bin Laden was saying to people, and we know that Egypt had a mole in Afghanistan and gave other good information. So really remarkable that nothing was done. Then later, a few weeks later, the Egyptians warned that this operation that was going forward were in the advanced stages. And this is according to the Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak himself. Then Germany warned that terrorists would use airplanes as weapons to attack, quote, American and Israeli symbols which stick out. Then Jordan warned that a major attack using aircraft is planned inside the United States. And by the way, they even said the name of the code name of the attack, which was the Big Wedding, which turned out to be the code name of the 9/11 attack. Russia warned that suicide pilots were training for attacks on U.S. targets. And then the head of Russian intelligence later stated, we clearly warned the U.S. on several occasions, but they did not pay the necessary attention. And then the Taliban, actually, one of the foreign minister of the Taliban himself was kind of upset with the other leaders, didn't want the attack to go forward, so he warned that Al-Qaeda was going to plan an imminent huge attack, quote unquote, inside the U.S. that would kill thousands of people. And funnily enough, the excuse in the news reports about why this wasn't taken seriously is it said because the U.S. intelligence agencies were suffering from warning fatigue. They were getting so many warnings that they just couldn't handle it anymore. Even Argentina gave a warning because not a lot of people know this, but there's a little sort of a pocket of Al-Qaeda in the Argentina area. France gave a warning. It's an echo of an Israeli warning. And I'll tell you the Israeli warning. They warned, well, they had 2 separate warnings. First one, they said 50 to 200 Al-Qaeda terrorists are inside the U.S. and planning an imminent, quote, major assault, unquote, aimed at a, quote, large-scale target, unquote. And then this is probably the most remarkable warning, is that according to Der Spiegel and some other newspapers in Europe, a few weeks before the attack, before 9/11, Israel actually gave the U.S. a list of 19 terrorists. Now, we don't know if that's the exact same 19. However, the reports specify that 4 of the names were the same, including Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shihi, and the 2 hijackers in San Diego, al-Midar and al-Hazmi. So these are the leaders of the 9/11 plot. And according to Der Spiegel, all these names were given to the U.S. government. Morocco gave a warning, saying that al-Qaeda is planning large-scale operations in New York City in the fall of 2001, possibly targeting the World Trade Center. So I could go on. These are just some selected warnings that I've given. But as you can see, there's so many warnings that, in fact, in the middle of August, Cofer Black, who's the head of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, he was speaking at a convention of counterterrorist officials in a public venue, and he said, quote, "We are going to be struck soon. Many Americans are going to die, and it could be in the U.S." And later on, he said that the top leaders were unwilling to act unless they were told that the attack was coming within the exact day, and here is what they are going to hit. So in other words, he's saying that basically the leaders didn't care to stop the attack, made no moves to defend the United States unless they were told exactly the day and the location of what the attack would be. And in fact, we can see that the Bush administration did absolutely nothing despite all these warnings. There was one thing that I found interesting in the 9/11 Commission hearings is that Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, who is still the Transportation Secretary for Bush, he was asked, so can you point to one thing that the Bush administration did before 9/11 that helped safeguard the U.S.? And he said no. Wasn't a single thing. So that's the first part of my talk. The second part, I want to talk about the issue of Pakistan. I could also talk about Saudi Arabia, but I don't have time for that. But between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, these are the 2 countries that you think would have given the U.S. warnings. I mean, here we're getting Argentina, all these countries, Morocco are warning the U.S., but the 2 countries, Pakistan, extremely closely tied to the Taliban. They basically, created the Taliban, and Taliban was their puppet, as even the 9/11 Commission has stated. And then Saudi Arabia, where all the hijackers are from, Osama bin Laden's from, we don't get any warnings from those 2 countries. And I think there's significant evidence that the Pakistani intelligence agency actually had a very direct role in the plot. It's a very unusual intelligence agency. It's called the ISI. And it got very rich off of drug money. So rich from all the opium and heroin coming from Afghanistan and moving through Pakistan that it's self-funding. So it's basically politically autonomous, and people call it a state within a state. It can basically do whatever it wants. Some people say that the ISI is more powerful than the actual Pakistani government. And as the Wall Street Journal has said, quote, "Despite their clean chins and pressed uniforms, the ISI men are as deeply fundamentalist as any bearded fanatic. The ISI created the Taliban as their own instrument and still supports it." So there's essentially you cannot see a difference between the ISI and the Taliban, and in my opinion, al-Qaeda. They all are essentially the same group of people. And in fact, there was some U.S. reporters went to Afghanistan just right before 9/11, and they said everything here that we've seen, everything the Taliban has, the water, the oil, the food, everything's coming from the ISI. They're just complete puppets of the ISI. So I'm going to run through just a couple things really quickly here, some key characters to kind of keep in mind. Randy Glass is he was involved in a U.S. sting operation. He was a criminal himself, got involved in a sting operation. with the FBI and the, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And in 1999, there was an ISI agent, and they were recording the conversation as part of their sting operation. And this ISI agent was within sight of the World Trade Center. He pointed to the World Trade Center, and he said, "Those towers are coming down." And he repeated that statement on several occasions. And this evidence has been recorded on tape. So we can see this is interesting because some people say that people didn't know that the towers would be completely destroyed. But here we are, even in 1999, stating with assurance that the towers are going to be completely destroyed. And I could go into a lot more about Randy Glass, but there's a big sordid history there of the ISI's involvement in even trying to buy nuclear weapons to give to Al-Qaeda. Now, another character to keep in mind is Saeed Sheikh. He's a very, very important character, and I think he's really the key to understanding a lot about 9/11. He's famous for being the killer of the reporter Daniel Pearl. You may remember in 2002 he got very brutally kidnapped and publicly executed, basically. And but it appears that Saeed Sheikh actually was one of the key funders for the 9/11 attacks. And so I'll read a quote from the London Times about him. It says, "Saeed Sheikh is no ordinary terrorist, but a man who has connections that reach high into Pakistan's military and intelligence elite and into the innermost circles of Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda organization." He, in fact, was so tied in that bin Laden called him his favorite son, and he was even talking of replacing bin Laden someday. And yet, he was also an ISI agent. So I can't go into all the details, but there's a lot of evidence showing that he actually trained some of the hijackers in terrorism techniques, and he directly funded the attacks. Now, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the so-called 9/11 mastermind, he was also Saeed Sheikh's boss. They knew each other. For instance, they both participated in the Daniel Pearl killing. Now, Robert Fisk, who, as you may well know, is a very famous journalist, he said, like Saeed Sheikh, Mohammed was an ISI asset. Indeed, anyone handed over by the ISI these days is almost certainly a former employee of the ISI, whose control of the Taliban amazed even the Pakistani government. And then there's General Mahmoud Ahmed, and he's the head of the ISI. The Wall Street Journal and other media outlets reported in a month after 9/11 that General Mahmoud Ahmed, head of the ISI, ordered $100,000 to go from Saeed Sheikh to Mohammed Atta, the head hijacker. So we see a direct link from the head of the ISI to the head of the hijackers. And this remarkable evidence has really been ignored. And this last fact leads to all kinds of interesting connections to the U.S. because it so happens that General Ahmad, on the morning of 9/11, was actually meeting with Senator Bob Graham, Democratic Senator, Porter Goss, House of Representatives guy who's now up for being the new head of the CIA, and John Kyle, another senator. And in the weeks before this, these same three U.S. politicians were in Pakistan talking to General Ahmad. We don't know what they were talking about. I certainly would like to know. So I'm running out of time, but another interesting figure that I think also points to very interesting directions is a guy called General Hamid Gul, who's a former head of the ISI. And a recent report from UPI suggested that he actually, this Hamid Gul, was actually the master planner for Osama bin Laden. And one reason this is very interesting is because Richard Clarke has stated, the counterterrorism czar for Bush and Clinton, stated that in 1999 they intercepted a message between Hamid Gul and some of the leaders of the Taliban where he said, that time Clinton tried to hit you with a missile, late 98, don't worry. Clinton is not planning on doing it again. And even if he does, I'll warn you again like I gave you advance warning on the last time. So this to me suggests that there is some sort of collaboration between people within the U.S. government and people in the ISI, and this General Hamid Gul is being fingered as one of the masterminds of the 9/11 plot. The 9/11 Commission has covered up this information. There was actually an article in the LA Times that said that some people on the commission said that the Pakistanis were, quote, up to their eyeballs, unquote, in involvement with the Taliban and al-Qaeda, and that the commission findings that were actually released were, quote, only the tip of the iceberg, unquote, on these connections. Now, Daniel, I'll say just one more thing. Daniel Ellsberg, of the famous Pentagon Papers whistleblower, he said that, quote, it seems to me quite plausible that Pakistan was quite involved in 9/11. To say Pakistan, to me, is to say the CIA, because it's hard to say that the ISI would know something that the CIA had no knowledge of. So I hope that we can figure out these connections and bring these people to justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, for those of you in the audience